Hello friends, you may have heard my assertion that a greenside bunker shot is the product of one of the two families of short game, namely the modified full swing. Chipping and putting is the other one, which is generally more important. But anyway, a full swing modified with a sand wedge usually is what we use for around the greens. Now sand wedges are actually relatively new. In the 19th century, people were using these things called a niblick. And as you can see from the picture I'll show you, they were very sharp. This had about a 41-degree loft on it, which is a good 10 or 12 fewer than most sand wedges. And it had no grooves on the face, as you can see. And if you happen to catch the sand with that very sharp edge there, the ball would go a yard, and then you pull up and it whizzes over the green. And a great champion, the Squire, Gene Sarazen, was so frustrated with those that he bought a bunch of those niblicks and started putting solder on the bottom and shaping them with a file, and eventually came up with a design that worked wonderfully and is still the way we shape a sand wedge to this day. It has this much more prominent and bulky base to the club, and it stands up at an angle where the trailing edge of the base, called the bounce, is actually more prominent than the cutting edge. The concept is that you can now hit into the sand with some firmness and not have it stick in the sand. So that swing you just saw me take was a full swing modified, obviously, and not very hard, with an open club face, with a sand wedge, with the knees pushed left so that they don't have to actually do anything, because you want to minimize what they're doing in movement. You're on an uneven surface. It's best not to be moving your feet and legs around very much. And it's called, on grass, a flop shot. They're really identical. And in fact, I train people to hit their bunker shots by first teaching them how to hit a flop shot. So the videos I'm about to show you, I filmed in the early 2000s using a very clunky old VHS camera. And so apologies ahead of time for the graininess and the somewhat antiquated sound to them. But I think you'll agree that the concepts and the content is worth the trouble. And so the first one is the basics of how to train a bunker shot. Find a nice bunker, make sure it's flat, draw two lines, and train to be able to hit between the lines. Usually if people go wrong, they bury the club into the sand 6 or 9 inches earlier than they intend. And so it takes little training, and that's one of the reasons we push the knees to the left and leave them there, to actually hit into the sand where we're planning. And once you've got the club hitting into the sand in the right place, you try it with a golf ball.
So a basic sand shot is hit with a sand wedge. We're not far from the flag, about 15 yards. And a sand wedge is what was called a niblick in the old days, a very sharp instrument, with an additional piece of material that was first devised by a very famous golfer, Gene Sarazen, who was rightly frustrated by the effect of niblicks. If you dug into the sand, the ball went a yard. If you picked it clean, you went over the green. So he found that by putting a little knob of solder on here and shaping it correctly, he could make a better club. And then it became what we now call a sand iron. Now, the trailing edge of the base of the club is more prominent than the cutting edge, so that when you hit into the sand, if you correctly organize the club face slightly open, the club will not bury. That means the ball has a chance to come out. If the club buries, it'll usually go a yard. Then, of course, you're frustrated, pull up, and then you go over the green or into the face of the bunker. Now, it's very important that we grip with the club face open, point the shaft at the middle, and take a full swing, and observe the rules of golf, which say that you may not ground the club in a hazard. That means you can't touch the sand while you're preparing to swing, or while you waggle, or as you swing back, only as you make the play for the ball. This picture here, 2 lines about 10 inches apart, perpendicular to where we want to go, with the balls in the middle. Our job is to, in training, of course, we're breaking the rules slightly, take a practice swing and hit the sand, but in every other regard, observe the rules. Don't ground the club preparatory to hitting the ball or as you swing back. And you want to see if you can enter the sand on the first line and exit on the second one. It's rather like drawing a picture of a ladder here, with the rungs being the mark you leave with the club. Now, if you enter very early, the ball will go a yard, or the club will come out right where the ball is, and you'll hear a click, never a good thing with a bunker shot, and the ball goes too far and too low. So we want to enter the first line and exit the second one, and you test that with your practice stroke. Can you enter there and exit there? If you are successful, then walk up and try it with the ball. And out it comes, and about 9 inches from the hole, a lucky one. That's a sand shot.
Now, the next video is about how to hit out of firm sand that might be compacted or wet or both. And it's different. We actually generally don't use a sand wedge because that bounce now actually ends up being an obstacle to success. So more like a gap wedge or a pitching wedge.
Well, here we find ourselves in a bunker. Never our favorite thing, but it's made more complex today because we had some rain last night. The sand has been compacted, and so we have to operate slightly differently. Normally in sand we take a sand wedge, which has a feature first conceived by Gene Sarazen, a great champion, where he built up the trailing edge of the base of the club, what they now call the bounce of the club, so that the club could be hit into the sand without the danger of it burying. It resisted that. Under these conditions, that's actually inconvenient because the bounce will actually bounce out of the sand and blade the ball into the face of the bunker or over the green. So we take a pitching wedge, which has a less pronounced bounce, allows us to hit into the sand and actually carve a little bow wave of sand ahead of the club as a cushion between the club and the ball. The ball will come out lower and roll more, but otherwise will operate correctly. We grip in the normal fashion with the club face open, look at and hit about 2 or 3 inches behind the ball and hold on firmly enough so that the impact will not jolt the club out of our hands or stop the club. So we take our normal stance for a bunker shot, which has the knees kicked a little to the left so that they don't need to move the legs so much. Then we open the club, aim and swing a little to the left, and hold on firmly.
And then my remaining video is how you hit when your ball is buried in the face of the bunker. Now I start the video by talking about how a ball would be buried, what they call a fried egg lie, on the flat. It's quite rare actually in a bunker that be true. So a fried egg lie is sort of as it's described. You've got this sort of crater that's about 5 inches across with the ball nestled in the middle. And the key is to get that cutting edge of that club to pass a ½ inch below the base of the ball, and very much within those lines that I described earlier when you practice. Now, the more difficult and slightly more common way that a ball might be buried is in the face of the bunker. And so there, things start to change fairly dramatically. Normally, we're trying to enter the sand.
Get the ball out. It's our principal objective. Get the ball out of the bunker.
Before the ball. And
now, normally, when you're hitting in sand, if my hand was sand
with
here,
this, because of
the ball buried, if it's buried on the flat,
you actually want to enter quite
we can enter and exit about 3 inches before and after the ball, and that would mean that the edge of the club passes about a ½ inch below the ball at its very lowest. That's actually an ideal formula. Now, for the club to pass a ½ inch below this ball, it's going to be necessary not to enter 3 inches back, but something nearer to 1 inch behind the ball. Otherwise, you'll go right under the ball, and the ball will just trickle down the bunker, or you'll bury it deeper into the face. We use a sand wedge, but don't open the club quite as much. It's got a lot of loft, and the slope is going to augment it to the point where we might actually throw the ball straight up in the air and drop it back in the bunker. We need some forward progress. So we're going to grip firmly, hit hard, and hit 1 inch behind with a slightly open club face. But first we've got to prepare ourselves so that we have access to the ball. Walk up, grip down the club a little because usually the ball's above your feet and it benefits you. And first of all, make a provisional test of how far you're standing from the ball. It's likely it's not the final test. Once you've decided that you can reach the ball correctly, and if you can't, adjust, then it's very important to level the sand out below your right foot. This is the one bearing most of your weight. This one just really stops you from flopping around. So this one doesn't bear a great deal of weight. This one does. Then hold the club about 1 inch behind the ball and look and hit right there. Grip firmly and expect something of a jolt. The club, of course, won't go very far after it hits the ball. It's more than likely that you'll fall down the hill. I hope it's not hazardous. But certainly the ball performed its prime function, which is to get out of the bunker. And with a bit of luck, that ends up on the green and gives you a chance to make up for your bad luck by holding a putt.
So those are the variations that you're likely to encounter when you're near the green.